Today on the show, you and I discuss the dangers of labels, names, and the meanings we assign to them, and how this wound up getting one peaceful protester viciously beaten by folks on his side.
They're here already! You're next!
Let's go!
Welcome to the future, where the glass is half full and you'll need new glasses, where you'll be jumping from conclusions.
The past is annulled, and a new future is born!
Never before in history has so much meant so little to so many. AD on the radio.
Hoping against hope that the floor of Mr. Hume's 9th grade social studies class would open and swallow me up so I wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. Mr. Hume, a Vietnam veteran, was staring at me, eyes fiery. Anger like I don't think I'd ever seen from him. Directed squarely at me. Meanwhile, some other kids around me were laughing. And worst, Jennifer, the girl that I had a massive crush on, the one that was sitting next to me, the one that I was trying to be cool for, was nervously laughing at me. And that nervous laughter was because Mr. Hume was so unbelievably angry. No one could tell if this was for real or if he was joking or what the deal was because it was so out of character. He was one of those teachers that, he had a rather hands-off approach to educating. He told you what page in the book to read. You would read it. He would let you know when there was going to be a quiz coming up. He would let you know that there was going to be a pop quiz once a month, so you should stay vigilant. And he kind of gave you the necessary keys to the kingdom when it came to passing his class. Without a lot of fluff, without a lot of frill. No nonsense basic education. And like I said, he was a Vietnam vet. That we had learned. A couple different junctures. And I was kind of a cut-up. A little bit of a rebel. Voted in high school class clown and first to make $1 million. So, I had sort of a easygoing, laid-back, anything for a laugh attitude toward my education, which for the most part served me well, but somehow I'd gone horribly wrong here. He was angry. There was no mistaking it. He was deathly angry at me. And there was a reason for this. There was a reason why this previously laid-back guy was so unbelievably perturbed at what I just said. Even though he'd heard it, he asked me what I just said. And I repeated it. Go Rebels? He was like, have you been paying attention? I had not. Struggle with attention deficit disorder. AD is more than just a clever nickname. But I would do that thing where I'd walk into class and I would be like, I'm going to study, I'm going to pay attention, I'm going to take in every word that the teacher says. And somewhere along the way, I would just drift off, as one does. But I would always make up for it by studying extra hard for the tests. Even though I couldn't concentrate or focus in class, I managed to pretty much ace the test by going to extra help the day before, verbatim regurgitating it all onto the test paper next day, and promptly forgetting it. But I wasn't an attentive student during his class. And so when he asked me to clarify my Go Rebels situation and the Go Rebels position I had just taken by shouting, Go Rebels! Mostly to impress Jennifer, the girl sitting next to me that I'd had a crush on since about the 5th grade. Yeah, that didn't go over well. And there was a good reason it didn't go over well. There's a good reason it didn't go over well, and that was because, well, I'd linked up in my mind since seeing Star Wars as a wee strip of the lad that rebels were, for the most part, the good guys. In fact, completely the good guys. I mean, look, Star Wars mirrors many aspects of world history. There's obvious sort of Third Reichish overtones with the Empire. And the rebels, well, this would be England and America, basically. Like an old Western. Darth Vader wore black. Luke Skywalker wore white. It was a clear and easily definable good guy, bad guy situation in Star Wars. And, well, for that reason, from a very early age, I'd got it anchored in my skull, my rather thick, rather young skull, that rebels universally meant the good guys. These were the Luke Skywalkers of this world. So, when, in his current events class, after having not really paid any attention for the previous 45 minutes, I said something along the lines of "Go Rebels," what I didn't realize was that I'd essentially just cheered on and lent my support to a Middle Eastern terrorist group. I learned the hard way, the very hard way, that rebels did not, for the most part, mean the good guys. But it was an early and quick lesson in labels and how they don't always mean what you think they mean, which is an important conversation that we have today after what happened in Oregon.
Real radio. 104.1.
Where the left and right come together for fundamental truths. AD on the radio, on Twitter at ADSXE.
So yeah, after a rather unfortunate misunderstanding between me and my 9th grade current events teacher, I got a quick, sharp lesson in the history of people that called themselves rebels. Like I said, I hadn't been paying attention in class. I didn't know what was going on. Literally, I hadn't heard a word that came out of that guy's mouth. I was too busy with my attention deficit disorder mind wanderings and, just too taken by the fact that the girl I'd had a crush on since 5th grade was sitting next to me this class, and I was trying to dream up a way of being cool and impressing her. I managed to achieve the exact opposite when I shouted, "Go Rebels!" having absolutely no idea what was being talked about or what I was talking about. What I realized is I just vocalized my young support for a Middle Eastern terrorism group. And "What did you say?" were the words that spat out of this teacher's mouth as he fixed me with fiery eyes and reminded me of the fact that he was a Vietnam veteran and looked for clarification as to why I just said what I said. I was like, well, rebels, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, not the dark side of the Force. Rebels are the good guys, right? And when he realized that I wasn't a terrorism sympathizer, but instead was just a kid who had neglected to pay attention in his class, he sort of backed down off of his haunches a little bit. And he essentially explained to me that the vast majority of people that were classified as rebels at that time, and still to this day, I think, could also be easily classified as terrorists. Folks like Al-Qaeda, folks like the Taliban, folks like the National Liberation Army in Colombia, all calling themselves rebels, all recognized by the international community for the most part as being terrorists. And you know what? To be fair to my young self, I'm not the only person that has been confused by labels and things of that nature when it comes to trying to figure out who the good guys are. You may or may not recall that during the closing credits of Rambo, you'll see that Rambo is dedicated to the brave freedom fighters of the Taliban. So yeah, slight error in judgment on the part of Sylvester Stallone and the movie makers of the day. But you know what? Could you really blame them? I believe President Reagan referred to the Taliban as freedom fighters. But we all know, with the benefit of a bit of hindsight, that these so-called freedom fighters were not, historically speaking, on our side. Here's the thing. You start to realize when you look at situations like this that labels, names, and the meanings that we attach to them can give people trouble. Everyone from a 9th grade version of me who kind of sort of dozed off in class while trying to dream up a way of impressing the girl that was sitting next to him to the President of these United States of America, Ronald Reagan. We've all had difficulty with names and labels and the meanings that are attached to them. So, I thought it would be an interesting one to talk a little bit in light of what happened the other day about Antifa. If you're like me, when you first heard of Antifa, you didn't necessarily know what it was because, this is something that's experienced a bit of a resurgence in recent times. Now, one of the great touchstones for me with my knowledge of the Second World War and everything that went on around it was a book called Man's Search for Meaning. I think it was on my father's bookshelf back in the day. I was like, what's this? Man's Search for Meaning. And he was like, that's a heavy one, but it's an important one to read. And I can't remember how old I was at the time, but he was like, you read it, and if you have questions or if there's things in there that disturb you, you come to me and we'll talk about it. My grandfather on my mom's side had flown Grumman Avengers. He'd been a naval aviator, shot down behind enemy lines at Iwo Jima. He had some stories. My grandfather on my father's side had been part of British intelligence, stormed the beaches at Normandy, kissed by de Gaulle. So I had a real interest in the Second World War. And I could not put Man's Search for Meaning down. It was terrifying, and that much more terrifying because it was real. And if you've never read it, it's basically this guy, Viktor Frankl, who was at Auschwitz, who managed to, as the title would suggest, find meaning in his time living through one of the most horrific things a human being has ever lived through. And one of the many ways that Viktor Frankl gave his time at Auschwitz meaning is by trying to figure out what his purpose would be. His purpose in writing this book, his purpose in collecting his thoughts. And this search for meaning led him to go, all right, I'm going to figure out a way to be productive with this time here. I'm going to figure out a way to do my best to make sure that things like this don't happen in the future. I'm going to document my experience. I'm going to find a way to cope with this experience through meaning. And one of the meanings I'm going to give my life is preventing a tragedy, a human tragedy like this, ever happening again. Or at least doing my very best to make sure that never happens again. Fascinating book. And man, on those days where you feel like you're having a rough go of it, a chapter or two out of Man's Search for Meaning will inspire you and cause you to pick your chin up significantly. As my father pointed out, in a very heavy way, but it will. So that was one of my big touchstones with the experiences of people that had been involved in the Second World War. Viktor Frankl's life's work in many ways was the prevention of fascism moving forward, which is why when I heard about Antifa, I was like, this might not be a bad idea.
For more stimulation and less irritation, 9 out of 10 doctors choose KPRC AM 950, Houston's more stimulating talk radio.
Don't get the blues, get all the news. We mean all of you guys out there in Radio Land. All aboard!
He's back. AD on the radio.
Give it up, yeah. Give it up, yeah. Bring this on, come on, come on.
So what exactly is the deal with Antifa? He said, not wishing to sound like Jerry Seinfeld, but doing it anyway. Whoops. What is the deal with Antifa? Actually, Jerry Seinfeld's very quick to point out that he doesn't actually say what is the deal with all that often. It's interesting. But yeah, Antifa to me, when I first heard of it, just because of the way we assign meanings to names rather quickly, Antifa sounded okay because anti-fascist, Antifa. Okay, all right, well, I'm anti-fascist. Am I Antifa? I don't know. I don't think so, but let's dig in a little bit deeper and see exactly what Antifa is all about. Now, Antifa is something that's experienced a tremendous resurgence in the last couple of years, and, well, it doesn't have any direct connection to the anti-fascism movement in the United States, which stretches back to the 1920s and 30s. Almost 100 years now. There were these militant leftists involved in battles against American pro-Nazi organizations, like the Friends of New Germany. And like I said, there is no real connection between the Antifa of today and the Antifa of the 1920s and 30s. Antifa can be traced back to, I believe, Weimar, Germany. And the Anti-Fascist Action Party, I think they were called, formed in 1932. After World War II. But before we got this new kind of version of Antifa, after World War II, the Antifa folks were like, hey, fascism is really bad. We're going to go hunt out fascism where it exists. We're going to find these pockets of Nazis. We're going to find pockets of fascist sympathizers. We're going to do our very best to kind of stamp it out wherever we can. Because see that whole World War II thing that just happened? That was unbelievably bad. So, yeah. The idea of anti-fascism. I'm completely anti-fascist. I'm assuming you are too. But, well, like I said, it's more than just being in line with Viktor Frankl's mission of man's search for meaning, of wanting to stop anything like the Holocaust ever happening again. Like wanting to prevent another Auschwitz from ever existing again. And we fast forward to, well, not now, but we fast forward to the 70s and 80s. Punk rock. This is where we see a resurgence of Antifa types. Antifa, like I said, originally formed in Germany in 1932, and after the Second World War, a bunch of folks that would go around doing their very best to stamp out fascism wherever they could find it and confronting fascists and things of that nature. Like Viktor Frankl, the mission statement was to get out in front of it and prevent it from happening again. But we see Antifa come back through punk rock. In the 1970s and 80s, in England primarily, also in America as well, though, there was a certain amount of neo-Nazism that existed in the punk rock scene. And, well, there was fascism within the punk rock scene. There were white supremacy punk rock groups. There were skinhead white supremacy punk rock groups. And, well, that spawned practices of, I guess you'd call them street-level anti-fascist types. In the 80s, punk fans in America called themselves the Anti-Racist Action Movement, the ARA. And they would do what Antifa tried to do after the Second World War. Find racism, find fascism, find these things, and try and stop them before they got moving too far. Skinheads would come to punk rock shows in the 80s and 90s. Neo-Nazis would show up at the shows and try and recruit fans. Well, the anti-Nazi types were there doing their very best to stop their fans being recruited. The motto was, we go where they go. If a Nazi skinhead handed out leaflets at a punk rock show, well, these folks, the ARA, the Anti-Racist Action League, were there to say you're not welcome here. If fascists were putting up wheat paste posters by punk rock venues, the ARA would tear them down and replace them with anti-racist slogans. Back in 2002, they broke up a speech by Matthew F. Hale, the head of the World Church of the Creator, a white supremacist group in Pennsylvania. And that's where we start seeing some violence creep in. 25 people had been arrested at the brawl. So now, more and more often, you're reading about Antifa. And more and more often, you're reading about violence between factions, between white supremacists and Antifa. And there is the mission statement of the Antifa types, which is, before it really manages to get a hold of anything or anyone, we're going to do our very best to stop fascism in its tracks. And if you're like me, if you grew up reading the works of Viktor Frankl, you go, this seems like a good idea. But like I said, it's important that we don't get bogged down in labels and the meanings that we assign to names. Only because, did you know what happened in Oregon a couple days ago? The folks over at the Oregonian ran a story about this guy. Dude called Paul Welch. He's a 38-year-old man. And on August 4th, there was an Antifa versus Patriot Prayer showdown in downtown Portland, Oregon. The Oregonian wrote about him. He was one of hundreds of progressive Portlanders who had turned up to oppose the right-wing rally held at the Tom McCall Waterfront Park. Do you remember reading about this? Now, this guy who was staunchly left, staunch supporter of Bernie Sanders, he was beaten. He was attacked and he was beaten. By who? The white supremacists? No. No, he was attacked and beaten by Antifa. Why? Because he was carrying an American flag. Now, you might have seen this happen. There's a video that's been viewed the better part of 1 million times of his beating. It's vicious. And bear in mind, this guy is a registered Democrat. He was showing up to protest the Patriot Prayer types, the right-wing folks. In theory, this is a man who is on the same side of history and the issues as the Antifa types. He's showing up to raise up his voice against white supremacy. He's there to raise his voice up and have himself counted as a man who is willing to do what it takes to take to the streets to stop even a hint of fascism getting any kind of a foothold in America. In theory, things should be kind of sort of freaking hunky-dory between him and the Antifa types. He's a registered Democrat, and you know what? He's got the voting record to prove it. He voted for Bernie Sanders in the 2016 presidential primary and Hillary Clinton in the general election. And he brought with him an American flag. He brought with him an American flag because he's proud to be an American. He's proud of the symbol of America. He feels that America stands for something that he believes in deeply. And he feels like the flag was being co-opted by the people that he was opposed to. He felt as though the Patriot Prayer types were taking the flag and saying it was their symbol exclusively. And he said that he had the flag because he wanted to take it back. And this is a guy who's been participatory in our democracy. This is a man who has a voice and who's used it. This is a man who showed up at the Women's March in downtown Portland, held during the weekend of Donald Trump's inauguration. According to the Antifa types, he's on all the right sides of history. But that didn't stop him from getting beaten down for having an American flag. He's an activist. He delivered supplies to the Occupy ICE encampment. He brought water. He brought toilet paper. He brought sunblock. But he got into trouble with the Antifa types. They demanded that he turn over the flag to them, calling it a symbol of fascism. He said, no, it's my flag, and, well, it means something to me. Just because you say it's a fascist symbol doesn't mean I still don't believe in my version of America. So, the so-called anti-fascist types did something that seems kind of sort of to me decidedly fascist, and this is where we get bogged down in labels and names. I go, oh, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. He was anti-fascist. These guys are anti-fascist. Not the same thing. They ripped the flag out of his hand, or tried to anyway. He wasn't going to give it up. And there's this video. It's chilling stuff, but it's something that you should watch. And it shows these Antifa guys wearing masks, beating Welch. One of them had what looks like a club wrapped in black fabric. Because he won't give up the flag, they hit him in the back of the head. A man who is there to peacefully protest. A man who is holding a flag, a symbol of the potential he sees in America. A man who has a set of morals and values that Antifa should have absolutely no problem with whatsoever. And yet, because he won't give up his flag, his personal property, forget that it's a symbol to him, forget that it's a symbol of hopeful America. Because he won't give up his flag, they beat him, viciously hit him in the back of the head. He goes over like a ton of bricks. He's on the ground. He's curled up. Another Antifa type starts hitting him with some sort of homemade weapon. Blood pools around his head. And finally, eventually, thankfully, people rush to his aid. People rush to his aid, drive a bleeding man who came to represent his version of America that he's proud of. Drive a bleeding man to an urgent care clinic where he gets 4 staples to close a massive gash in the back of his head. And then he spends the next couple of days recovering from a concussion. So what did he do? He put his faith in our system. He put his faith in the police. He went and filed a police report. And he had this to say about the beating he received at the hands of the folks in Antifa. He said, "It's kind of like you're playing into your opponent's hands when you do that sort of thing. That's not what I was there for." So, the idea of Antifa, applying a label, applying a name to a movement, to some people that want to stop fascism in its tracks wherever they go. That's led a lot of people to go, not so sure about Antifa. Are they in the right? Are they on the right side of history? What exactly are they doing? Could they be for me? Am I anti-fascist? I don't agree with fascism. Do I need to double down, get myself a black hoodie and a bandana and go for it? If I'm truly going to be anti-fascist? What exactly are Antifa? What are they all about? Well, let me bottom line this for you. A group of people who would viciously beat a man, who would viciously beat a peaceful protester and leave him lying in a pool of his own blood, perhaps to die, had strangers not intervened and taken him to a hospital, where he was left with a gash in the back of his head, numerous staples in his skull, and a concussion that took days to recover from. A group of people who would do that to another person because he would not give up the flag, his American flag, when they demanded it from him. A group of people who would do this, these are not our friends.
You're longing for that shining sun. You walk these streets most every day. You're waiting to get washed away.
Radio. Radio. 104.1.
Now, more AD on the radio.
Back once again, the ill behavior, delivering and giving you my musical savior. Back once again, it's your boy AD, and can't nobody rock a body better than me. Back once again, the ill behavior, delivering and giving you a musical savior. Back once again, it's your boy AD, and can't nobody rock a body better than me.
So, my mom visited me recently. She plays cello in the Spokane Symphony, but recently she flew down to hang out, spend a week with me and my sister. My sister just had a baby. She and her husband are the proud parents of beautiful baby Ellie Rowan. Oh my gosh. Perfect kid. And you know what? I've never been an uncle before. And I never really sort of got the importance of, I don't want to use an expression as clinical as imprinting yourself on a kid. But I'm really glad that I was able to meet my baby niece, Ellie, the first day she was born, and then come back a month later with my mom and, well, see my mom connect with her granddaughter for the first time. It was an amazing, beautiful, wonderful thing. And I'm glad that I got to be there. I got to hold her when she was just that teeny tiny. I'm glad I got to be one of the first faces she saw. I'm so glad that I get to be a part of that little girl's life. And I'm so glad that I got in it early. I'll always, always be there for her. No matter what it is she's going through or what it is she needs. I will always be there for my niece. And it's a funny thing. I don't really... you might have been an aunt or an uncle in the past before. I don't really understand it. I don't really understand the instinctive thing that kicks in when you hold a little newborn baby. But immediately you know that you will be there for that child forever. And it's an awesome, beautiful thing. The other cool thing about the week was it gave me a chance to catch up with my mom. We were able to talk about what's going on in the world, as we do often. And, you know, it was interesting. The subject of some prejudice came up. And I was like, you know, you and Dad, you may have had your foibles, you may have had your shortcomings as parents, but one thing that you were very, very good about was raising me without prejudice in the household. I kind of thought that we as a society were evolved past that. Like the idea that someone was gay didn't even register to me. I knew there were gay people, I knew there were straight people, and I didn't think any more or less of anyone because of their sexuality, because that was how my parents raised me. And I just thought that was the way the entirety of the world worked, and I realized a little later on in life that that was not so much the case. And I thanked my mom. I was like, you did a really good job at that. And she was like, oh, well, it wasn't that difficult. We just kind of never made a big deal of anything. None of that stuff really matters. It's your actions, your quality as a human being. That matters. And I was like, yeah, I know, you got it right, Mom, but a lot of people don't. And I remember one of the very first times that I encountered someone who was not okay with other people being gay. And it was when I was visiting from England and went to America, was hanging out with some other kids, and I saw a Judas Priest poster on this one kid's wall. I was like, dude, that's awesome. I love Judas Priest. Breaking the law. And he was like, yeah, Judas Priest are awesome, but how do you feel? How do you feel about that whole Rob Halford thing? I was like, what whole Rob Halford thing? He's like, you know, he's gay. I was like, you didn't know this? He was like, well, no, they just made the announcement. I was like, how could you have missed this? The guy wore assless chaps on stage every single night. The rest of his outfit was a sort of German leather biker getup, and, well, he had his butt hanging out the whole time. He was the campest man in the history of metal, with some possible notable exceptions, maybe Freddie Mercury of Queen. He was like, oh, that was a surprise too. I was like, no, it wasn't. The band was called Queen. So it was hard for me to believe that anybody had a difficult time picking up on the signals that I felt were somewhat obvious. I've always had pretty good gaydar, I think. I've talked to some gay friends of mine about this. I've always had pretty good gaydar because I've always been able to go, they're different than me. This gentleman is differently motivated than I am. And I don't know exactly how I know that, but I know that. But whatever the case may be, it wasn't just my young friends that had a hard time understanding that Rob Halford and Freddie Mercury might have been gay. Apparently David Spade had a problem with that back in the day too.
Growing up, I think Queen was my favorite band. They were hot. You know, what's funny is I didn't know bands were gay growing up, you know? I didn't know. You have no concept of that as a kid. My mom liked Liberace. I had no idea. I liked Elton John. No idea. Queen. Queen was actually helping you out. They were throwing out some hints, too. They weren't hiding. First of all, name's Queen. That's where 90% of the country checked in on that one. Not me. Nice, cool name. Secondly, their songs are about making out with guys. Didn't bother me. They wear buttless chaps in concert. I was like, those guys get a lot of they really don't. My friend told me, I was like, what? Wham, no idea. But if I go back and listen to those songs, I can tell. You can tell, just listen to the words. Like that one song, Jitterbug. 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 You put your into my mouth.
The innocence of youth. Hey, do you know, and I would have told you were wrong if you told me this a little while ago, but apparently there's new scientific research to suggest that, well, your rants on Facebook over the past couple of years might have actually accomplished something. I know. It all seems totally futile. And you know what? I checked out of all that. Do you remember that one weekend? That one weekend where all of social media exploded into a perpetual argument over the stars and bars and gay marriage. Do you remember this? It was one weekend where those two things converged, the Confederate flag and gay marriage. And man, people lost their ever-loving minds about these two topics for a full weekend on social media. And I saw it. I saw the amount of work and effort that people had put into letting their opinions be known on the internet. And when Monday rolled around, took stock of what it achieved, and it was the sum total of zip, zing, nada, nothing. And I was like, yeah, what a waste of time and energy. And I decided then and there. I hadn't participated in that whole brouhaha, but I decided then and there, I'm out. I had a rule. Not only will I not fight with people on social media, not only will I not talk politics on social media, I'll never even bother disagreeing with people on social media. That, in my mind, was the smartest way to go through life. But as it turns out, your social media rants on Facebook for the last couple of years might have actually changed someone's mind. Yeah, yours. It's true. How so? We'll get into it next.
Leave the stimulation to the professionals.
Everyone is so smart.
KPRC, more stimulating talk radio.
There's something happening here, and you should know what it is. The dumbing up of America. Now, more AD on the radio.
So do all of your rants on Facebook for the past few years seem completely and totally futile? Like everyone's already dug in so hard to their beliefs that there's no way you're going to change anyone's mind? I would have told you were right if you felt that way in the past. And I still kind of stick by that. You and I were talking about this a little bit before. But do you recall when it was one weekend, the internet exploded over two issues that were being fought about simultaneously on everyone's Facebook page, on everyone's Twitter feed, on everyone's Instagram. And those two issues were gay marriage being legalized and the stars and bars. The Confederate flag and gay marriage were the hot button issues, and people went all in on it. I remember checking in a couple times. I didn't participate in it because it didn't seem like, well, an especially productive thing to do. But it reaffirmed to me that it wasn't a productive thing to do when on Monday I sort of took stock of what had been accomplished by people spending the entirety of their weekends, their time, their precious free time that they got away from the daily grind, arguing with other people about their beliefs with regard to gay marriage and the Confederate flag. And I thought, what has this accomplished? Absolutely nothing. And from there on in, I went, that's it. I am out. Not only am I never going to argue politics online, I'm never going to talk politics online. I'm in the advantageous position where if I want to get something off my chest, I say it on the radio. So I do have that outlet that other people don't, and I respect and understand that some people just sometimes have to get something off their chest, and okay, I've stayed silent long enough, and here are my thoughts on blah. But that's not for me. Not only do I not participate in politics, I do not argue about politics online, and I made a decision that I would never even disagree with anyone about anything online. Not going to argue, not going to disagree. I'm just taking the path of least resistance. You know what Facebook and Instagram and Twitter are for? Adorable pictures of my puppy Millhouse and keeping up with the New York Mets as an out-of-market fan. The end. But as much as I would advise you to steer well clear of Facebook arguments with regard to politics, and as much as I would have told you that it was a complete and utter waste of your time and all your online efforts with regard to all of this was completely futile because you're not changing anyone else's mind because someone's deeply held beliefs are going to be just as deeply held as yours, and you're just talking at each other. You're not necessarily engaging in any real human contact that helps one person understand the other person's perspective. As it turns out, I might be wrong. Your online ranting might not be completely, totally futile. So, we'll discuss exactly how I know this and why you should perhaps keep on ranting moving forward after we get into the events of today in our segment, My Witness News. Did you see which superhero dumped his girlfriend for a 22-year-old model? If you're like me, and obviously we're not talking about an actual superhero, we're talking about an actor that plays a superhero, but if you're like me, this is just the sort of thing that stops you from being able to invest in the idea of Ben Affleck as Batman. It is, of course, Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck reportedly dumped his successful television producer girlfriend, who's age appropriate, almost as old as him. I think he's like in his mid-40s now, and went on a date with a 22-year-old Playboy playmate who is now his significant other. Yeah, Ben Affleck dumped his age-appropriate, successful businesswoman girlfriend for a 22-year-old Playboy model. Right. Strange, because, I would expect a guy with a humongous phoenix tattoo on his back to make better decisions about such things. Oh man, this is exciting, especially if you're Don Henley. The Eagles' Greatest Hits album is officially the best-selling album of all time. Yeah, did you see this? You know what it was before? Have a guess. I'll give you a second to gather your thoughts on this one. Before, as it turns out, it was Michael Jackson's Thriller. Yeah, hold on. Let's listen to the music of the Eagles. Let's listen to the Eagles' Greatest Hits in less than 30 seconds, shall we?
You can't hide your high. It's another tequila sunrise. I got a peaceful, easy feeling.
Oh, that's a good one. That's my favorite.
One of these nights, desperado.
Oh, that was in Seinfeld. Maybe that's my favorite.
Come to your senses. You get the best of my love. Witchy woman.
That was in Seinfeld too, but not my favorite.
Take it to the limit one more time. You ought to take it easy.
By the way, fun fact, the Eagles are currently on tour. Only one guy is still around from these songs, though, and that would have been Don Henley. I was really surprised that the Eagles continued after Glenn Frey passed away. But apparently Don Henley and Glenn Frey, not exactly the best of buds at all times. So maybe it was easier for Don Henley to go on tour as the Eagles when he didn't have to come to agreements over certain things with Glenn Frey. I'm not saying that he's happy about the situation, but I'm just saying that perhaps he realizes he could sustain it if there wasn't that personality clash moving forward. I don't know. I do know this, though. If you're a big bar trivia person, you probably know that the best-selling album of all time used to be Michael Jackson's Thriller. But yesterday, and this happened just yesterday, the Recording Industries Association of America announced that the Eagles' Greatest Hits 1971 to 1975 was certified 38 times platinum, has overtaken the number one spot. That's 38 million in sales. That Eagles album was number one for most of the early 2000s until Thriller surpassed it after Michael's death in 2009. Thriller is now in second place at 33 times platinum. Hotel California, also by the Eagles, is in third. The Eagles have done rather well over the years, 26 times platinum. If you're wondering how the Eagles can suddenly have a lead over 5 million in sales over Michael, it's because the RIAA doesn't calculate individual album sales very often. In fact, they last updated the Eagles' Greatest Hits in 2006 when it was certified 29 times platinum. So it's sold significant amounts of records since then. So there you go. And I think streams play into it now. I think something like, 15,000 streams of something online like iHeartRadio or Spotify or something like that. I think that equals one album sale. So people are still racking up the numbers even if they're not doing it in the traditional sense with the Eagles' Greatest Hits. So there you go. Bill Cosby tweeted an Aretha Franklin tribute. Gross. But when it comes to Bill Cosby's poor taste, nothing really tops his cocktails. Jimmy Buffett. Did you see this? Jimmy Buffett is opening a new group of Margaritaville-themed retirement communities in beachy locales. Man, I am ready to skip over the next 35 years and move there post-haste. Really? I could waste away in Margaritaville, living the parrot head life that he talked about in a retirement community. I don't know about you, but like I said, I'm ready to skip over the next 30 years, move straight to Del Boca Vista next to the Costanza family, and enjoy shuffleboard and early bird dinners. I think that sounds great. But yeah, Jimmy Buffett, Margaritaville-themed retirement communities. It's awesome. And perfect for anyone who likes to drink Metamucil with salt on the rim. Kevin Spacey's new movie earned an impossibly low $618 at the box office this past weekend just gone by. Yeah, he's got a movie called Billionaire Boys Club. I think 10 people went to see it. And it earned, like I said, an infinitesimally small amount of money, $618. Or, as Johnny Depp knows it, a smash hit. In a speech the other day, Melania Trump said social media can be destructive and harmful. Right. Yeah. I wonder where she picked up on that notion. Like I said, I would disagree on the concept of disagreeing online. I would say that you can't change someone's mind on social media. I would say that people are already so dug in that there's absolutely no chance your incredibly well thought out posts are going to have any significant effect on our political process. But I would be wrong. And I think that's the thing. The other thing, besides the fact that it seems to me like a giant waste of time arguing with people on social media, ranting on social media, I would say the other reason it seems like a giant waste of time is the fact that there's always going to be that one person who has more time on their hands than you. If you really get into it online with someone, well, they're going to be able to stay up later than you, get up earlier than you, having Googled a bunch of facts and figures that support their side of the argument. And they're going to refer you to corners of the internet where you will be forced to read something so you can retort against it. And ultimately, the person who wins those arguments seems to be the person with the most time on their hands. But ultimately, you're both giant losers. Not you specifically, but people in general when they get into all that sort of thing. At least that's what I would have told you up until now. Yeah. You thought all your rants on Facebook for the past few years were totally futile, like everyone's already dug in so hard to their beliefs that there's no way you can change anyone's mind. Well, wrong. Keep ranting, my friend. Keep ranting, because apparently I need to rethink some things. According to a new survey by the Pew Research Center, 14% of Americans say that they've changed one of their political or social views in the past year because of a post they saw on social media. That's 1 out of 7 people. Yeah. 1 out of every 7 people have changed their political or social views in the past year because of a post they saw on social media. Apparently, the folks that are more likely to change these views are younger. Folks with more open and pliable minds. Folks whose thought patterns aren't so dreadfully calcified. Folks who are a bit more open to the fact that the world might be slightly different than the picture they've got in their mind. Those would be younger people. They're more likely to change. 23% of people under 30 have changed an opinion because of a social media post versus only 13% of people between the ages of 30 and 65. I don't really respond to posts, but one thing I do respond to, and quite frankly, these have been some of the most enriching, ongoing sort of pen pals I've had. It's people that write me after I say something on the show that they don't agree with. The people that go, man, you're so right, and I really kind of vibe with what you're saying, and I'm glad to hear somebody speak the truth. That's cool. I enjoy that. That's interesting. But we're not really learning anything from each other, are we? The folks who I really enjoy corresponding with, and please feel free to do this, ad@iheartradio.com is where you can hit me up, or you can find me on Twitter and Instagram @ADSXE. The people who I really enjoy corresponding with are the people that think differently. And while the social media posts might not necessarily be something that are ever going to change my mind, when somebody writes to me thoughtfully and explains their position and why it might be different than mine, and if someone opens up a letter or an email or something like that saying that they respectfully disagree, man, I love that. Because, well, it means I'm probably about to learn something. If they're going to come at me in an open and communicative way, then I'm more than happy to listen. So I welcome it. If that's you, please hit me up. You want to tell me I'm absolutely right all the time about everything? Well, let's be real here. That's okay. But if you've heard something on this show that you're not okay with, that you disagree with, I'd love to hear why. Because like I said, it means that you and I are about to learn something together. So hit me up. Have yourself an awesome one.